I was 76 years old when my own children packed their bags, climbed into their air-conditioned cars, and drove away from me during the worst heat wave our town had seen in 40 years, leaving me alone in a house with no working air conditioner, no phone charger, and a refrigerator they had emptied the night before. They thought I would just sit there and wait. They thought wrong. By the time they came home 18 days later, the locks were different, the will was different, and so was I. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by the very people you raised, stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you might just give you the courage to stop shrinking yourself for people who never deserved your light. Before I go any further, hit that like button, type the word Diana in the comments, and tell me what city or country you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you know to feel less alone while I tell this story. Now subscribe if you haven't, because this channel is where I tell the truth, even when it's ugly, even when it costs me people I thought would love me forever. My name is Diana. I raised 2 children alone after their father left when they were 6 and 9. I worked double shifts at a diner for 11 years, so they could have new shoes every fall and a roof that didn't leak. I sold my wedding ring when my daughter needed braces. I never remarried because I told myself my children needed all of me, every piece, with nothing left over for myself. I thought that kind of sacrifice built loyalty. I was wrong. It built entitlement instead. By the time I turned 76, both of my children were grown, married, and living comfortable lives. My son had a contracting business. My daughter worked in real estate. Neither of them struggled the way I once had. And somewhere along the way, without me even noticing it happening, I had become an inconvenience to them. A woman who took up space in a house that, technically, still belonged to me. That house was the one thing I had left from my marriage. 3 bedrooms, a small garden out back where I grew tomatoes every summer, and a porch swing my late husband built before he decided fatherhood wasn't for him. I lived there with my son and his wife, who had moved in 8 years earlier when they said they needed just a little help getting back on their feet. 8 years later they were still there, and somewhere in that time I had quietly become staff instead of family. I cooked. I cleaned. I watched their children 3 days a week without ever being asked if I wanted to. And when I got tired, I was told I was being dramatic. The heat wave started on a Tuesday in July. The kind of heat that presses down on your chest like a hand. Our air conditioner had been broken for 2 weeks, and every time I mentioned it, my son said he'd get to it. My daughter, who lived 20 minutes away, came by that weekend with her husband to help plan a family trip to the coast. A trip, I would later learn, that had been booked for over a month. I wasn't invited. I found out the morning they left. I woke up to the sound of suitcases wheeling across hardwood floors, car doors slamming, and laughter drifting through an open window. By the time I made it downstairs in my robe, both of my children, their spouses, and my 4 grandchildren were loading up 2 cars in the driveway like it was any other Saturday. "We're heading to the coast for a couple weeks," my son said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The Hendersons' place. You remember." "What about the air conditioner?" I said. "It's 104 degrees today." "You'll be fine, Mom. Open some windows. We'll fix it when we're back." My daughter didn't even get out of the car. She waved from the passenger seat, sunglasses on, already scrolling through her phone. Nobody asked if I wanted to come. Nobody asked if I had food. Nobody asked if I was okay being alone in a heat wave at 76 years old with a heart condition they both knew about. They left that morning and didn't come back for 18 days. I want to be honest with you because this channel only works if I tell you the truth, even the parts that don't make me look strong. The first 3 days I cried more than I had in years. I sat on that porch swing my husband built decades ago, fanning myself with a paper plate, and I asked God what I had done wrong. I replayed every sacrifice, every missed birthday of my own, every dollar I never spent on myself, and I wondered how it had led to this. An old woman sweating alone in a house she paid for, abandoned by the people she gave her whole life to. But somewhere around day 4 something in me shifted. I stopped crying and started thinking. Clearly. Coldly. The kind of clarity that only comes when you finally run out of excuses for the people who hurt you. I called my nephew Wesley, my late sister's boy, who works in HVAC repair. He came that same afternoon, fixed the air conditioner himself, refused to take a dime from me, and sat with me on that porch drinking sweet tea while I told him everything. Not just about the heat wave, about the years. About the unpaid babysitting, the disrespect, the way my own son's wife rolled her eyes when I asked for a thank you. Wesley listened without interrupting, which is a rare gift in this family, and when I finished, he said something I'll never forget. "Aunt Diana, this is your house. You built this. Maybe it's time everyone remembered that." Those words cracked something open in me. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya, who had helped me settle my husband's affairs years before. I told her I wanted to make changes, real changes, to my will, to the deed on the house, to everything I had quietly let slip through my fingers over the years out of guilt and exhaustion. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She just asked when I could come in. Over the next 2 weeks, while my children sunbathed on a beach 200 miles away, I rebuilt my entire life from that kitchen table. I had the house deed reviewed and discovered something my son had conveniently never mentioned. He had asked me to sign what he called a simple form 2 years earlier, a form that, buried in the fine print, gave him partial rights to the property upon my death, structured in a way that would have made it difficult for me to sell or leave the house to anyone else without his approval. I had signed it without reading closely, the way you do when you trust someone completely. Priya was furious on my behalf. We spent 4 days untangling it, and by the end of the first week, that clause was gone, reversed through a process Priya called a quitclaim correction, and the house belonged to me again fully with no strings attached to anyone. I changed the locks on day 9. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I realized that a house key isn't just a piece of metal. It's a statement about who gets to walk into your life uninvited. I had been handing mine out for free for too long. I called my daughter's husband's company. He worked logistics for a regional shipping firm, and quietly asked around through a mutual friend whether anyone there knew about a job opening she'd mentioned wanting for over a year, a promotion she assumed was guaranteed because of her husband's connections. I said nothing critical. I simply mentioned, in passing conversation with my old friend Loretta, whose son sat on the same hiring committee, that I'd heard wonderful things about another candidate's work ethic. I never lied. I never sabotaged anyone. I simply stopped quietly pulling strings I didn't even realize I'd been pulling for years, smoothing every path my children walked while they stepped over me to do it. I sat down with my financial advisor and reallocated the modest savings I had left, money my children assumed would simply land in their laps someday without ever asking, without ever earning it, without ever once asking how I was doing. I established a small trust instead, one that would go toward my grandchildren's education directly, bypassing my children entirely, and I donated a portion to the local senior center that had quietly been sending volunteers to check on isolated elderly neighbors for years, the kind of organization nobody thinks about until they themselves are the ones sitting alone in a heat wave. And I had the porch swing taken down. My husband built it for our family back when family meant something different to all of us. I gave it to Wesley instead. He deserved it more. By day 15, the house was quiet, cool, and mine in every sense of the word. I planted new tomatoes. I repainted the kitchen a soft yellow I'd wanted for 30 years and never asked permission to choose. I invited Loretta and 2 other women from my church over for dinner, and we laughed until midnight at my kitchen table, a table that had mostly only ever heard arguments in silence for the better part of a decade. On day 18, I heard the cars pull into the driveway. I watched from the window as my son tried his key in the front door, frowning when it didn't turn. My daughter knocked, sunburned and confused, her husband carrying suitcases behind her, the grandchildren tired and cranky from the long drive home. I opened the door myself. "Mom," my son said, stepping back slightly. "Why did you change the locks?" "Because it's my house," I said simply. And I decided I wanted to know exactly who has the right to walk into it. We sat in the living room, the one I had also quietly redecorated, and I told them everything. Calmly. Without raising my voice, without tears, without the desperate need to be understood that had defined so much of my life until that heat wave. I told them about the air conditioner, about Wesley, about the deed, about the trust for the grandchildren, about the porch swing now sitting on someone else's porch where it would actually be appreciated. My son's face went pale when I mentioned the deed correction. My daughter cried, not out of guilt, I think, but out of the sudden dizzying realization that the version of me they had built their entire understanding of family around, endlessly patient, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, simply didn't exist anymore. "You can't just change everything because we went on one trip," my son said, his voice rising. "It wasn't one trip," I said. "It was 18 days of silence after years of being treated like staff in my own home. The trip was just the moment I finally noticed. I want to tell you that they apologized, that we hugged, that everything healed instantly the way it does in movies. That's not what happened, and I promised you the truth. What happened instead was quieter and in some ways more honest. My son moved out 4 months later into a rental across town, still working on himself, still occasionally calling to check in, the way you do with someone you're not quite sure you've earned forgiveness from yet. My daughter and I talk now, carefully, the way two people do when they're rebuilding trust from scratch instead of assuming it. She drives me to my doctor's appointments now. She asks before she assumes. It's not where we started, but it's real, and real is worth more to me now than convenient ever was. The grandchildren still come over every Sunday. We bake together. I tell them stories about their grandfather, about the garden, about the swing that now lives at their cousin Wesley's house. I am teaching them gently, the thing I never learned for myself until I was 76 years old, sweating alone in a heat wave. That love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just exhaustion wearing a kind smile. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story tonight, it's this. You are allowed to stop earning a place in your own family. You are allowed to lock a door. You are allowed to redirect a trust, repaint a kitchen, give away a swing, and rebuild a life that finally has room for you in it. 18 days alone in that heat taught me more about my own worth than 76 years of quiet sacrifice ever did. And I am not angry about the lesson, even if I wish it hadn't taken so long to arrive. If this story moved you even a little, give it a like, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I promise I'll be reading. And if you're someone out there who has been quietly disappearing inside your own family, made small in a house you built with your own 2 hands, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me decades ago. It is never too late to change the locks. Until next time, I'm Diana, and this is my story.